There's a good reason why the Bible talks so much about money. Not because God's desire is to give us so much of it, but because our desire to get it so often draws our hearts away from God. That's why Paul tells us in 1 Timothy chapter 6 that those who desire to get rich fall into a trap because they think that if they get money, they'll find life, and so they'll do anything in order to get it. That's why Jesus tells us in Luke chapter 12 that even if we get everything we want, having lots of money and lots of material things is not at all what life is really about. That's why Jesus tells us in Matthew 6 that it's absolutely impossible for you to faithfully serve the Lord while at the same time focusing your life on the pursuit of wealth. And that's why throughout the Proverbs we have so many instructions about how we should do business with one another, how we should use our money, and how we ought to think about money in general. That's a big emphasis in today's reading from Proverbs 22. And as we look at this chapter, we need to remember that the Proverbs are not blanket promises that we can claim for ourselves in every situation in our lives, but they are godly principles for living with wisdom in this world. And they're principles that actually don't find their fulfillment quite often until the next world. It begins by telling us what Jesus told us, that life isn't about having money. Instead, Solomon tells us, life is found in being in right relationship with God and right relationship with others, which shouldn't surprise us because Jesus said that all of the commands of the Old Testament can be summed up in two commands: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Verse 1 says, it's better to be in right relationship with people, better to have a good name before them than it is to have lots of silver and gold. In the eyes of the world, the rich are much more valuable than the poor. But in verse 2, Solomon tells us, and remember Solomon was unimaginably rich, but he tells us that both rich and poor were created by God, that He is the Lord of both of them. He says in verse 4 that true riches, true honor, and true life are found by having humility and in the fear of the Lord. In other words, by seeing yourself rightly in relation to others, and by seeing yourself rightly in relation to God. So since having real life is rooted in our relationship with God and our relationship with others, Solomon says, don't be dishonest in your business dealings. Don't cheat people. Don't mistreat people in order to get money for yourself. Verses 8 and 16 says that the one who uses his power to oppress the poor for his own gain will come to poverty and perish. But verse 9 says the one who's generous to the poor is going to be blessed. Those who rob the poor, verses 22 and 23 say, might gain some temporary wealth, but ultimately they'll lose their life. Getting a few extra dollars, or even getting a lot of extra dollars here and now, is a road that leads to nowhere. And so he says in verses 26 and 27, don't do foolish things like promise loans you can't pay just to get money. Don't be deceitful about land issues in order to try to gain something for yourself. Instead, he concludes in verse 29, just do a really good job at work. Work hard and give your best to whatever it is that you're doing. This proverb's not primarily really about money. It's about our hearts. You see, we tend to guard our bank accounts because we think that life comes from there. But remember, Solomon told us back in chapter 4 that we are to guard our hearts above all else, because from the heart flow the springs of life. Therefore, the key to handling our money in a right way is to continually handle our heart in a right way. So how do we do that? Verse 17 of today's reading. Turn your ear to listen to godly wisdom and apply your heart to it. And this is why. Verse 19. So that your trust may be fully in the Lord. And that's what we've been saying all along throughout this series. Real life, life that satisfies, life that lasts, is found not in what you can accumulate and achieve, it's found within. It's something that no circumstance can add to, and it's something that no circumstance can take away from. True life is found when in godly wisdom and in humility we surrender ourselves daily to God and we trust Him to be God in our lives.